Hello and welcome back. In today's session, we're going to talk about how the ePerspectives digital enterprise method and framework can help us when we are looking at a regulatory and compliance scenario in our business. This is where we need to be adherent to compliance requirements set out by regulatory bodies, and that has an impact on how we need to do things in our business. That normally presents a challenge in terms of how we make sure that this is duly incorporated and implemented in what we do. I'm Arsalan Rad. Let's get started by, as usual, looking at very quickly having a quick review of what is a digital enterprise, as we talked about the similarity with the paradigm shift when we moved from analog electronics to digital electronics, when we had the previous picture that was tedious, very difficult to trace. It's not really end-to-end, and also too many dependencies. If you're going to remove a component, there are too many that are dependent on it, which we can't even easily locate. So all those problems makes it that if you want to change functionality here, for example, get better sound in here, or better, in this case, we will have very big difficulties because we have to locate where all the components that involve our sound or amplification, and then see all the dependencies, and you can think the rest. We changed that paradigm into a digital one where we have one unified circuit diagram, and it is traceable, it is end-to-end, it is componentized. We separate the concerns, so what is inside a component is nobody else's business really. So, and then we can replace, for example, get better sound or amplification by just replacing a chip with another one, as long as we maintain the interface, that is the legs, or whichever way that it is. So we reinsert that, and the rest of the circuit will carry on seamlessly, but with better amplification. So we talked about us aiming to have the same advantages with a business when we call it a digital business. So what for the traditional businesses are like, they have too many connections, too many terminologies, too many mindsets, too many versions of data. They are not traceable. It's very hard to trace things and see their impact on one another. It's very hard to replace something because we have to first ascertain where else or who else depends on it. And this is not an easy thing by any stretch. So we then talked about changing that and making ePerspective, providing us with a unified circuit diagram of our business enterprise, right? So that this is where we have the same principles, we have componentized things, so we can replace them easily, we can get all the advantages that we had from a electronic digital circuit. So we want basically to have the business, a digital business enterprise, to be similar to how we have a digital electronic circuit. Now, a quick review of the ePerspectives framework. We have 3 key perspectives of business, enterprise, and change perspectives, supported by 2 horizontal perspectives of enterprise planning and operations. What do we do in the business perspective? We have business strategy, where we look at what we want to be to the outside world, how we interact with it, how we want to make ourselves differentiated and unique. And then we defined our key strategic capabilities, high-level services that we need to provide to the outside world. This is what the business wants to do. Next is business design, where we know, okay, now we know what the business wants to do and achieve. Now we have to define a business operating model that best accommodates that. So what are the processes, ways of doing things, as well as the structure, organization that needs to be in place, that needs to be in place in order to accommodate what the business needs to achieve. But then we talked about business perspective being implementation agnostic. That is to say, we don't take into account our constraints or anything that might be there with regards to technology, people, and resourcing, etc., because we know that things can change. in future. So this is where the enterprise perspective makes the business perspective implemented or deployed. So now we look at the enterprise IT and organization aspects, what organization we need to have in place, what enterprise IT we need to have in place in order to support this the best way, IT and technology. And then we look at the change perspective. We have said that we define change as baseline plus delta. So business perspective, baselines for us are business. Then the enterprise perspective baselines the enterprise that is supporting the business so that everything can be running and we can get the results and interactions that we initially aimed to achieve. Now, as changes happen, as we need to do new things, then we define change as baseline plus delta. So for any change, we have to identify that delta by going and doing a gap analysis, if you will, with the business perspective and enterprise perspective, find out where the changes are, locate them, and do change planning in order to give us a sound foundation to implement those changes. We talked about the inside-out view, that everything you see now here, these two sub boxes or whatever we call them, they are only relevant to whoever is working within business strategy. Perspective. Nobody else needs to know this. So this moment is only for curiosity. What do we do here? We have methods and ways to develop our strategy. We know Lean Sigma, Six Sigma, TQM, supply chain optimization, and enterprise strategic analysis and transformation, balanced scorecards, SWOT analysis, competitive analysis, market analysis, all that stuff that happens there. But we have said before, unfortunately, in many places, many companies, all this is done at a great cost, and we have that, but nobody knows how to leverage that downstream because the technology, the architecture is not compatible with this. So ePerspectives, rest assured, has made sure that this will not be the case. So this business strategy, we recommended that we distill that, and sometimes also, so we have techniques such as business canvas modeling. You see on the left in the little box there that it gives us a way to accelerate how we distill and define our business strategy. And then there's what you see there as an X matrix from MIT, and X matrix maps our strategic capabilities to stakeholder values, strategic objectives, as well as, most importantly, KPIs and metrics to measure them, key performance indicators to measure them. So all this we can now ignore and look at only the output. So all this will be mapped into a strategic capability model, and as we can see through the link, we can derive its strategic business value. So from now on, nobody cares about those two boxes, only about the SCM or strategic capability model. Now, in business design, as I said, we know what we want to do with business. Now we need to define how we're going to do that. So we define a business operating model, we define our processes, ways of doing things, the best organizational structure to support it. We look at customer journey because that's how the outside world perceive us when they interact with us. But again, once we do all that science, we capture all that, encapsulate that into a business capability model. As you saw there, business capability model starts by default as a strategic capability model, and then it gets more detailed, right, based on all the analysis that we do in business design, as you see in those two boxes, and all that knowledge will be captured and encapsulated into a business capability model, which in fact is our business operating model encapsulated. That is to say, how we are going to do things and what is the organization in place to support it. So in the best case scenario, we have to have an organization that is organized in accordance to the business capability model as well. Looking at then enterprise perspective to make the business perspective implemented. So we look at one aspect. So for every business capability, we look at the aspects of as you see, we start with an enterprise capability model whose default value is the business capability model, and then we look at that and we profile it in a 360-degree way. We call it the 4+1 analysis. So for every capability, we profile it from not only the IT and technology and organization parts, but through the links that we have to the adjacent perspectives. We will be able to link to business strategic value as well as the change portfolio aspect of things. So we do a 360-degree exercise of mapping and profiling, and then this is followed by heat mapping when we look at every capability and start look through different lenses and see how important this is for us. What is this priority? Is this constraint? Is this competitive? And through those lenses, we decide what are the key capabilities that are more in focus. So a version of the enterprise capability map, a heat map version of it, basically becomes what we have here is a change capability map, right? Which is a subset of it, which we only have highlighted the areas where we're going to apply the changes. Now we use capability-driven solutioning and capability-driven planning in order to then look at every capability to devise the best solution for it, but also an optimized planning for it, which is capability driven and hence maintains mutual integrity. This gives us a sound foundation to go ahead and make our implementation in future. And as mentioned, so everything else is black box except what we refer to as the golden thread, which is the XCM, which goes through the stages of SCM, BCM, ECM, and last ACCM. This is the only artifact XCM that we need to care about. The rest are black box. The rest do it within their own black box, and then they provide their input to their respective XCM in their stage, and then we can have access to their data if or when we need it and if or when we are authorized. So the 4 stages of the XCM, SCM is where we look at what does the business want to do, be and do, and we identify high-level strategic capabilities, and we make sure they are measurable from a business point of view. So they have a business strategic value assigned to them. Then we go to BCM and look at how does the business operate in, so in terms of its function and how is it structured. And so we have business capability model that is our operating model, business operating model encapsulated, and it's agnostic to implementation. Then we look at the ECM, where we now make that implementable. So we profile the BCM from the 4 aspects that I mentioned. So we fully profile it, eventually heat map it, and then this heat map gives us the foundation for a CCM. This is where we look at where we need to apply the changes and how we go ahead and apply and implement those changes. So when we look at the regulatory compliance requirements that have now, for example, we have new regulatory compliance requirements that have emerged, Basel III, Basel X, or what have you, for example. So when that happens, again, what we want to do is avoid what a lot of others do, just go downstream. Hey, I've got this great package for you that gets you regulatory compliance. I kid you not, that is a trick. This is no way possible. How can I put something downstream without having figured out its relationship to what I want to do, what is my business, how I want to do things, and expect it to do what it needs to do and give me regulatory compliance? It's not a genie in a box, really, albeit many anxious salespeople try to make it look that way. So again, we bring every aspect of this compliance, regulatory compliance, into the XCM. So when we look at SCM, say, okay, where are the changes? What capabilities are compliance related, right? So the rest of them are not in scope. So only the strategic capabilities that are compliance related are there, and we look at compliance KPIs, so we know their value that they have. Are they important? How important they are? Right? And then we move to BCM. Now we can look at the business processes and sub-processes, business capabilities. So then we look at them and say, okay, at this process level, does this go by compliance? For example, if for example, we have a process for like sending a client an order that maybe not has no compliance aspect, so we don't need to include that in our scope. But if there is anything in terms of how we do the final end-year reports, then how we register our clients, etc. That might have some compliance requirements, then be related to its given process at the right level. And then we can also relate it from an organization to the right level. So maybe we need some new people who have to have capabilities in terms of compliance knowledge or background or expertise and such. Then we move to the ECM and look at, okay, from the 4+1 point of view, now we know for these processes, these are where we have compliance requirements to change. So where do we go? What apps, what IT, app data, etc. We need to go, and where do we need to change, right? So these 3 applications, for example, are not even in scope for compliance. So let them be, right? Whereas we have 3 or 4 applications identified that they are involved with our reporting, compliance reporting, for example. Now we have to look at how we're going to change them or implement the changes there. The same with the organization, the same with the change portfolio. Last is looking at the CCM now, change capability model, and we look at that subset and say, okay, these are for us now we have identified a subset that is only compliance related. So these are the compliance related aspects we need to implement, and this through heat mapping, we know their priorities, we know the order, so we can devise a roadmap and then define the right projects to implement them. So let's review that. The strategic capability model looks like this, roughly, high level, and this is how we map it with an X matrix. Capabilities you see down below are mapped into KPIs, but also to strategic values as well as strategic objectives. So every strategic capability has a business value, business strategic value that we can measure its importance and impact. So we look at first the business strategy, we focus on strategic capability model, assess the capability, and analyze where or to what extent what that part is relevant to RC, to regulatory compliance, as mentioned. So if we don't need it, if it's a strategic capability that doesn't involve it, it's not in scope. Then we look at the X matrix and make sure that we can understand for that capability the business strategic value of it that is in place, so that we can prioritize, we can understand better, and then we define the strategic capabilities in focus together with their value from a point of view of compliance only, nothing else. So we're focusing only on compliance related, which I hope many can see a great advantage of. Then it's looking at BCM, business capability model, which is again our business operating model. In here, this is a heat mapping exercise where we can look at every capability and say, okay, are you compliance related? Okay, what services within you are compliance related? And if so, what is their priority? Is it low impact, high impact, and so on, so that we can have a very clear understanding of where in our business operating model the compliance requirements should apply and to what degree. So in here, we focus on BCM, and then if we don't have a BCM, we need to have a project, if you will, to define a BCM. It can be done in a large, medium organizations, somewhere between 8 to 16 weeks. We can devise a business capability model, or there are different ways. There's trade-offs in terms of doing that. But this is where we apply it. And then, as mentioned, we look at identify the capabilities, and we look at the processes, sub-processes and services, organization, customer journey, and we identify which elements there are compliance related and where we have compliance impact and when we need to do that, apply that, and then we have basically a compliance scope baseline that we're going to work from a business point of view. Next is the enterprise capability model. Now we look at the ECM, and then since it has all the profiling from all 360-degree aspect, this is where we can go and find out exactly where the compliance requirements need to be applied. So we take a compliance lens, additional as main, when we look at those 4 key lenses of business value, organization, technology, and portfolio. When we focus on them, we focus them from a compliance point of view, right? So are you relevant? If it's something is not related to compliance, has no aspects, it's out of scope. But then this is where we do the heat mapping to find out where it is that we need to apply in the 4+1 model from apps org, from business, as well as the change portfolio. Where are they that we need to apply these compliance requirements, and based on priority in future we can devise a roadmap. So first let's do the heat mapping, look at every capability. We'll look at whether it has critical impact on compliance, medium, high impact, and we can do other types of analysis that we see fit here. And in the end we have this heat map version that gives us that idea. So in the enterprise perspective, this is what we do. We focus on the ECM and then assess the ECM. If we don't have one, we need to do what we call a digital baselining exercise where we get a ECM in a 4+1 model. I have been into organizations where we've done this in an accelerated way with great result. So in here we look at the regulatory compliance aspects of business, organization, enterprise, IT or technology, as well as change. So from a 360-degree view that we have, we can go and find where these compliance requirements are actually applicable. So this helps us create a subset of the ECM with only the locations or places where the compliance needs to apply. And so we get the scope, we got the architecture here in order to the compliance architecture, if you will, from that, if you want to look at it that way. So and then we have IT services, right, that correspond to business services that we have identified, and then these become, we can start looking at them as microservices. That these become that help us give us good granular level services that are compliance dedicated. So this is the reason why I mentioned this, is here is where we can have a hook to the outside world. For example, with fintechs, with regtechs, with regulatory bodies and such, and essentially be able to provide a gateway for them to connect to this microservice. Since we have built, we have unfolded the compliance requirements from business strategy to business and then to enterprise capabilities. Now we can really have the right way for this compliance service to actually serve us and dip into real business and not just the low level end of the spectrum. So in this case, we have a baseline of ECM that now gives us where the changes with regards to compliance need to apply to our enterprise from all these different aspects, gives us the exact location and the place, as well as the priority associated with it. And the next is, as you can guess, is the change capability model. Now we know exactly which capability and what parts of them that have impact on compliance. So we look at them and then we do capability-driven solutioning and planning so that we can go ahead and implement these compliance-specific requirements. So in this case, we focus on the change capability model, or I'm sorry, it should say CCM there, and assess each capability and analyze whether to what extent it is relevant to the regulatory compliance aspects. And we look at the CCM. If we don't have, we need to do a heat mapping exercise on ECM to provide the CCM. And for each change capability, we look at we have to devise a capability-driven solutioning and planning. We talked about planning, that is important, that is capability-driven, so we have mutual integrity. But the solutioning here, this is the first time that you can look at, okay, there's a package that does this, right? And to what extent we can use it. So I'm sure many have been witnessing the scenario when there are new compliance requirements that somebody from the outside says, I have this magic box that gives you compliance, it's called an application. No, this is not, it's no way. We need to have gone this journey. We need to have done what we have from up downstream to come to the right level. And this is now when we're planning the implementation and solutioning, where we can look at technology and applications that we're going to use for implementation. So we create a subset of CCM that gives us the roadmap, the priorities, and we have all the compliance requirements. We have done the solutioning and planning duly, and now we baseline the CCM scope. I apologize again, CCM scope here, and this is where we have the changes that we're going to implement. So, as mentioned, everything is happening within this one artifact, one document that is called an XCM. Again, you can see the PowerPoint version that we had materialized in this simple Excel interface. You see in the light blue on the leftmost side, you see business strategy sub-perspective. So you see strategic capability, and it's a matrixized way to derive business strategic value. So we assign a business value to every strategic capability. Then the darker blue side is the business design perspective, where we look at the business capabilities. If you click on some of these, then you will see the customer journey diagrams, process map diagrams, functionality descriptions, and what have you there, organization aspects and so on. So as you saw in the PowerPoint. So this is where we devise the key business capabilities, and now we can look at them and say, okay, are you compliance related? If not, I'm not going to do anything with you. But if you are, then I'm going to look at your sub-processes and say, are all of them compliance related? Which one of them? So eventually I have only the subset of processes and sub-processes that are relevant to compliance, right? And then we move to the middle part, which is orange-brown, which is the enterprise perspective. As you can see, we have a mapping to the left side to the business value. So we have a 4+1. On the left side, we have the link to the business perspective. So for every capability, we can derive also its business strategic value through the matrix that you see on the leftmost side. And we also have on the right side a link to the change planning, change portfolio. So for every given capability, we can see, okay, are there currently some projects that are dealing with compliance, working on invoicing, for example, or payment capability and such? We need to take them into consideration. But the two key aspects of enterprise perspective are IT technology and organization resourcing. So we can look at here, you see these columns in the middle. We have app, data, and technology, as well as organ resourcing. So this is where we can go to locate applications or technology or data elements which are in scope for our compliance. So basically on the green side later, when we did the heat mapping, on the green side, we only get the subset that are compliance related. So nothing else, not everything else. And we focus on them, and then doing, after heat mapping through a capability driven modeling, planning and solutioning, we devise the right projects or programs, largely our programs, but probably this one will be closer to projects, where we define and implement the compliance changes. On that note, I would like to thank you for the time. I look forward to the next presentations. Thank you.